Hey, on this episode, we talk with Patrick Weikle about how to help get people connected and reach the next generation. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Church Leadership Lab. We love having conversations that empower healthy churches on this podcast. And so you are about to hear another one of those, and we are super excited about it. Hey, before we jump in, would love to just ask you to do me a favor. We would love if you are listening to this, if you can either subscribe or leave a review of this podcast. It really helps us in getting these conversations into more church leaders' ears and ultimately, hopefully, empowering more healthy churches. So if you find this content helpful, if it encourages you, blesses you, helps you lead better, we would love for you to do that. Now, we are super excited today to have a conversation with Patrick Weikle. In this conversation, we cover a variety of things, from talking about what does it look like to reach Gen Z, Gen Alpha. What are some things that have changed in youth ministry over the last 5 years and what hasn't changed? But we also talk about systems, processes to actually help people get connected. How do you use technology and automation, but also not lose a personal aspect of it? And so I'm so excited for you to hear this and think it's going to be super helpful. Now, Patrick is the lead youth pastor at United City Church in Humble, Texas, and co-owner of Simply Strategic Ministry. He regularly preaches and trains ministry teams across the country. And with almost a decade of ministry experience, Patrick has worked in churches from 750 to 7,000 and just has a huge variety of experience. He's passionate about reaching and equipping the next generation of students and pastors for the expansion of the kingdom of God. This was such an encouraging conversation, and we're excited to jump in right now. Well, Patrick, thanks so much for being on the podcast. We really appreciate it. We're going to jump in. First question we'd love to ask everybody. There's kind of the public bio that everyone heard that might be on the back of the book or the conference speaker bio. Sure. But what's something that doesn't make the public bio that all your friends and family would know about you?
Okay. Yeah, it would definitely be that I'm a coffee addict.
Okay.
And I know, you either hate coffee or you love coffee. And if you're in the I love coffee camp, everyone's like, oh, I love coffee. You don't love coffee the way I do. So,
all right. Unpack that for me, though, because I am in the I love coffee camp.
Okay.
So I got to hear a little more.
Yeah. So at the height, I was doing 16 to 18 cups a day. And all right, I've got the ember, right here just to keep it warm. Because, maybe that'll slow me down. I was like, if I get the ember and one cup stays hotter longer, but it didn't. That didn't work. And then I'm sure we'll talk about at some point, but I was at a church in Northwest Arkansas. And so I got introduced to Onyx Coffee. They're the best coffee in the world. Not sponsored, but John, if you want to sponsor me, I'm open to that, dude. So, yeah, dude, I'm so into like beans and origin and like flavor profiles. Yeah. I have the cupping spoon that's like plated in a specific type of metal so I can just taste the coffee and not like the impurities of the metal spoon. And
I love it.
At the church I'm at right now, there's a buddy of mine, really good buddy. He flies for United and he brings me back coffee all the time from like Colombia, awesome. Bogota. And so he's in a place now. I don't know if I can, he's in a place now, but they have like really rare coffee. And so I was texting him just the other day and I was like, if you get a chance, please go into town and pick me up some of this super rare coffee and I will pay you back for it. So yeah, dude, I'm a nerd. I'm a coffee nerd. I got the Chemex, I got the pour over, the whole deal, all into it.
Now, do you venture into like home espresso?
Oh yeah.
Are you mostly okay?
Yeah, we'll do that.
I started down the home espresso train. I worked at a coffee shop for a number of years.
Oh, let's go, dude.
Most people who spend time in ministry have in some form or fashion. Yeah. And then just actually this past Christmas, my wife got me an espresso machine. But one of those gifts that like it wasn't even on my radar.
Yeah,
I wasn't even like thinking about it when I was like, but this is amazing. So now I'm like going hard down that road and. Now I got a whole list of like, here's how I want to upgrade the setup. And it's a whole world, man.
Yeah. And like, you remember the first time you had like Nespresso, it's like you love coffee and then you stay in a hotel. Like we were in DC and we stayed at this hotel and I had an espresso machine. I was like, oh this just takes it to another level, And so, my wife and I were building out like our dreamed out espresso setup, but then, ministry. So it's like, let's do the quick.
That's why you need to get that sponsorship going.
No doubt, dude.
So that, you know what I mean? It's it kind of cuts the cost a little bit.
That's right.
So. Well, you've unpacked that well, and I would agree. You're, I think, obsessed with coffee, and I'm not at that level, but I'm close, maybe closer than others. Yeah. So I can respect it. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, I know we're gonna talk kind of on two different paths, but ones that cross, frequently, and I think are really relevant to church leaders today. But you kind of have a unique perspective because you spent a lot of time in youth ministry, but also you help churches all the time kind of understand, scale systems, help get connected. And so I'm excited to kind of talk about both things. But just to start, I'd love to hear from your perspective just some of the biggest changes in youth ministry you've seen, especially in the last 5 years. And as you talk about those, just understanding the church leaders listening, maybe how they kind of need to adjust or how you've seen people adjust.
Yeah. It's weird, man, because I think, and that's a question you get a lot when you've been in student ministry for a decade, because that's semi-rare, right? And so it's like, okay, what have you seen change? And on some level, like it hasn't changed, right? Like students are still broken and hurting and they need the gospel. Parents are still feel like they're too busy. They don't have a firm foundation of faith themselves. So it's hard for them to conceptualize, hey, I need to be discipling my kids. And so, they're doing what they do with everything else, school and sports. They're sending them to the specialist. And so you fix them. So on some level, in very Ecclesiastes way, everything's the same, right? But I think on another level, it couldn't be any different than when I started. And really, I think that is just the societal makeup in the mind of a teenager is so different right now than it was before. And what I mean is, and I'm saying nothing new here, but I think with the smartphone and kids younger and younger getting access to the world, they're living adult issues sooner. Yeah. So the biggest thing I've seen change in student ministry is I'm not just talking about, what am I created for? And, maybe some of the more core like student ministry stuff, like is smoking a sin? How far is too far? They're having existential crises about things like, well, what is my identity, even when it comes to like sexual identity or doubting true good and evil in the world, or they're watching the nations wage war and they're saying, okay, it's not just systemic injustice. Is there any hope for any systemic good in the world? And is every institution and establishment to be trusted or distrusted? And like a deeper, okay, then what is true? And, when the whole world's coming at them, it's kind of like that Dave Chappelle bit. If I can talk about Dave Chappelle, he's one of my favorite communicators. I'll censor his language, but, he said it in a way of like, how can I care about anything when I know everything? And I think on some level, what we're seeing with students is they're seeing all this mass trauma, all this mass evil, and they're living it younger because that's getting into their parents, the divorce rates skyrocketing, all these things. You're seeing materialism and the hedonistic movement fail, my generation, the millennials, and that's having effect on Gen Z and even upcoming on Gen Alpha. And so they just don't know. They don't know what the purpose of all this is, but they're having that. They're having that revelation in 6th grade.
Yeah. Wow. Which then, like, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but does that give kind of a greater sense then of, hey, we need to spend time on things that really matter, and versus like, a picture of youth group, at least when I came up in youth group, often there was a gross game of some kind. Like there was a lot of, and I had a great youth pastor. I'm so thankful for the church I grew up in, all of that, but it was in large part, hey, let's have a good time together.
Right.
And we're going to sprinkle on a little bit, of Jesus on top of that. and we'll see you at the lock-in and, you know, all that stuff. So is there sort of now a need for, we actually got to go pretty deep, because to address those things, I mean, it's not a 10-minute talk, you know, every other week. Like there's some work that has to be done.
Yeah. So, okay. So unique tension there. And I don't know if I'm unique in this, maybe not, but I think that's why fun has to go up.
Okay.
Because if I'm going to have a deep conversation with you about the God of the universe and what truth is and God's design, and it's going to lead to life and life abundantly. But Satan and his design in the world is going to seek to steal, kill, and destroy every good part and God part of your life. Then I only get the authority to do that if it's given to me. Mm-hmm. And how do I get authority? Through relationship. And so, I don't see the fun and the depth like on either side. I just think we as student pastors got to get better about our programming. And so, you know, like last night, we're recording this on a Thursday. Last night, we did a U-Ball tournament. Student pastors, if you haven't bought a U-Ball set, you need to buy one. It's worth it. Okay. And we did a U-Ball tournament before we jumped in.
Not sponsored.
But hey, U-Ball, if you want to sponsor us, we'd love it.
Second opportunity.
Yeah. Yep. But, you know, we ran a U-Ball tournament and did some giveaways and, you know, gave a giveaway to the U-Ball winners, but then we knew girls weren't going to really probably play. So we gave away some Lululemon gift cards. And then we jumped into a 35-minute sermon about character identity and being made in the image of God and what that means for you. And we had several students respond for salvation, for spiritual next steps, but also to talk. And I think that's because we relationally connect before we, you know, dive deep into spiritual things. And I think if you're frustrated, and I do a lot of coaching, and guys are frustrated because they're doing all the spiritual right things. I'm like, yeah, but your students don't love you and trust you. And so, you know, that's what we're seeing. That's what we're seeing right now in the next generation. It's a loved and trusted voice that wins because there's no shortage of information for them. And so they listen to who they trust. And that's why we call the rising stars influencers. Yeah. You know, it's not like famous anymore. It's not like, you know, experts. It's, hey, this is an influencer. Well, yeah, because they have influence over you. And so, you know, we want to be influential in the lives of our students. And so that moves at the speed of relationships. So we're going to have a lot of fun. And then we're just not going to be afraid of the deep stuff too. I need you to see both. I need you to have a deep spiritual conversation that makes you unsettled to your core, but know that this is an environment where you're going to have a lot of fun and you're going to see our faces and we're going to show up in your random lives. Does that make sense? A little bit kind of what you're saying so I think you do have, so you can't, to answer your question, you can't shy away from the deep stuff, but I would say that doesn't mean that you have to shy away from the fun relational stuff, because a sixth grader is still a sixth grader, you know, and a high schooler is still a high schooler. And we got to create relational environments where discipleship can thrive.
Well, if you're in ministry, then you know church operations can be a huge challenge. There's a lot to do, little time to do it, and whether it's just you or you have a team, my guess is you have a full plate. So how do you do things like communication and engagement, stewarding your finances, managing your digital presence, fostering community, and so much more in a way that builds a healthy church? Well, answering that question was the goal of creating the Guide to Healthy Church Operations. We wanted to take our 40 plus years of experience serving the church, combined with wisdom from various experts, to provide a blueprint for how you can navigate the ever-changing world of church operations. In this guide, you'll find things like how to improve member engagement and participation, building into staff and volunteers, making better decisions with clear metrics, the essentials of financial stewardship for churches, and so much more. And of course, we wanted to give this to you for free. So there's a link in the show notes to download the Guide to Healthy Church Operations. And we would love for you to grab a copy and use it to help grow a healthy church. Yeah. Well, even as you're unpacking that, like some of the issues like that you unpack that are very different due to the access to the entire world through a smartphone.
Right.
Like some of those things, it can just be, I'm sure, heavy and dark. And so there is, even as you're saying that, like if we're looking at truth, beauty, and goodness, and truth is something that generation has probably learned is a, sliding scale of whatever kind of that interpretation is, that opportunity to show beauty and goodness in fun and relationship. And I think those fall into those categories for sure. It makes a lot of sense then where that would actually help further conversations about truth, what is real, what your identity is, and all that stuff.
Yeah, because the scripture says that God's word doesn't return void, right? And when I'm coaching people through Simply Strategic, I always try to make the point of like, God's word won't return void, but your students might not return.
Yeah.
And it's like, I want to start the conversation, develop the conversation, and see the conversation come to fruitfulness. And so like some people are okay because like I saw a reel today, because I watch TikTok on Instagram like every good millennial should through reels,
Yeah.
And so I watched a reel today, and it was like something about this morning. I was getting ready. It was something about like, some old guy, not that I'm hating on old people. I love old people. But like, he's like, if you're preaching and a kid doesn't want to engage and they don't want to be around to learn about the things of God, then let them go. And I'm like, really? Because for me, I'm like, I'm not flexing and excited if I'm like, oh, we're preaching such the deep stuff that it's turning students away. It's like, oh, okay. Where are they going?
Talk about missing the forest for the trees. Like you're like,
it's like, well, where are they going? Now, to the same token, I'm also at 31, not impressed by a crowd anymore.
Yeah.
It's like, we can get a crowd. We did a dodgeball tournament 2 weeks ago, had over 640 students. And last night we had probably like 320.
Yeah.
It's like, you can do a crowd. And so like guys who are like, even in the coaching world too, where it's like, yeah, man, we got a big ministry. And I'm like, big doesn't mean important or impactful.
Yeah. Or fruitful.
Right. So it's gotta be, and and maybe this is maybe this is going to trigger somebody or whatever, but I'm very much of like, let's fight for the middle, like it's never just fun. It's never just deep theological work. It's probably somewhere in the middle. And so let's just fight for the middle.
Yeah. You mentioned like wanting, I want to be able to have an ongoing conversation with students. Like you want people to not just show up once and say, this is great, thanks for the pizza, dodgeball, the talk, whatever, I'm out of here. But like to show up, to be there, to continue. And I think a huge part of that is kind of a process to get people connected. And I think that even goes beyond just youth ministry. Obviously, that's something in ministry in general. Like you want people to show up and then to keep showing up, regardless of where they're at in faith and all that. So I'd love to kind of, hear from you, from what you're seeing from coaching. What are some of those big gaps that you see in like a church assimilation process? And then what can church leaders do about it?
Yeah. So how much time do you have? I think the first one is that they don't have it. The first biggest gap I see is that they may even be what we would call, I'm not even sure if we still use this language, but they may be what we call an attractional ministry, right? Like, and they're seeker friendly, and they don't have a follow-up process. And it's like, hey, you had 30 first-time guests. That's amazing. What's your plan to get them back? It's like, oh, well, we were just kind of praying once they saw how great it was, they would come back. Yeah. So I think the first one is they don't have one. And one of the things that we just push super, super hard at SSM, but even as a student pastor, is one of the most important systems that does scale your ministry, but is scalable, is a follow-up system. But two would be, ironically enough, even for us, is that it's too automated.
Okay.
And automation is good. I'm pro automation. My Landon at SSM, super pro automation. We're even pro automation at this church. But there's just nothing like personal. And so I think you can see some, they have every Zapier integration and ClearStream, and they're synced up with MailChimp, and it's just boom, 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 boom. But the world's doing that now too, right? And so since text message has become the new inbox, you're seeing, yes, you can guarantee everyone sees the text, unlike the email, right? But what's the engagement, And I think it's way more. Our senior pastor always jokes on Monday, he'll personally text every first-time guest. Yeah. And he's thinking about moving that back to Sunday. But he's always fascinated with how many people think it's a scam. Or like, sure. is it really you? Or they just expect it to be some bot? So I think, one, you don't have one. Or two, it's too automated and not personal enough. Or three, the big gap that I would see is that it stops at getting them to come back, and then that's it.
Okay.
And so it's all like, hey, come back, come back, come back, come back, come back, nothing else. And so I would say that you need to develop a follow-up process that doesn't just push them to come back, but gives them a wide funnel of things that we have for you that could be your next step, maybe before even the next Wednesday or the next Sunday rolls up. And so for us, a high schooler shows up on Wednesday, we want to follow up personally, but systematically and with good automation and process, right, on Thursday and say, hey, thanks for being here. Did you know we have life groups on Sunday nights? And then we want to drop them in a group text, with the person who brought them and their life group leader and say, hey, this is James, and the 9th and 10th grade guys and girls meet at this house. We'd love to see you there. And then follow up after that and say, check in the system. Did they go to group? Did they not go to group? Hey, I saw you went to group. How was it? Was it amazing? Did you love it? Hey, saw that you didn't make it to group Sunday, whatever is contextual in that conversation. Maybe they've been ghosting you or not. But hey, Sunday, Wednesday, Wednesday's coming again. We'd love to see you Wednesday. And so, good automation and good system actually lets your personal interaction be way, way higher. And so, those would be the three. You don't have one, it's too automated and not personal enough, or three, it's only focused on getting them to come back again and nothing else.
Yeah. And that, as you're talking about the automation, that's kind of where my head was at, is like, how do you use automation to be almost like an assistant, a partner, whatever, to support that personal interaction? Because I will say, my guess is your senior pastor's not meeting everybody Sunday, putting their number in their phone, and then, sitting down and like writing each tech individually. And like, there's ways to support it to where it's not a bot sending out a message,
sure.
But there is technology that surrounds it to then support it and then really highlight kind of the personal nature, in those interactions.
Yeah. So I like to think about systems and automations like a conveyor belt and like a warehouse. And so, if you have a lot of great product, but no delivery system, then it doesn't matter. And if you have a great delivery system and no product, it doesn't matter. So for me, the best systems and processes like Zapier, like a MailChimp, like a, list through a Fellowship One, shout out, right. Or anything like that, Planning Center, right. Rock, whatever it is you use, Touchpoint. I mean, there's a bajillion out there that doesn't cultivate the lead, but brings the lead to me. Yeah. That's the system that works. And that when I interact with it, I can put it back on the conveyor belt and it moves it to the next thing. That's the best system, because a system is something that makes movement possible. Right. And so by the time my senior pastor gets a card on Monday morning or a contact, it's because a QR code was scanned, a connect automatic was shot off, info was gathered, that was gone and compiled into a CSV. That CSV gets dumped into his inbox, or his OmniFocus, which is, shout out to OmniFocus. He loves it. And then he walks in Monday, just opens his setup, and it's, hey, here's 5 people to connect with. And so, and then from there, once you connect with them, okay, what system, what workflow, what, Asana or Monday or again, F1 or Planning Center People, or what are you using that can have automations in it that then kicks it to the next step to where you don't have to think, man, what is the next step here? Yeah. That way you focus on, hey, Scott, who is Scott? Well, what's his activity level been? Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to engage, and then he's going to go to the next step, and then I'm going to engage again. Yeah.
Yeah. And that gets to the point then, like you said, it's supporting. I love that analogy too. I'm curious, what are ways that you've seen, like, or have you recently where you're like, oh, that's a really interesting way to use technology. I haven't seen that before. Or because I do think things continue to evolve. I mean, pre-COVID, like QR codes, I feel like most people were still kind of like, what's that funny square?
Yeah.
And then obviously people, through COVID, whatever it was, and there was a Super Bowl commercial, all of that. Like now we're scanning menus with our QR code to get a menu on our phone at a restaurant. It's like more, oh, this is normative now. But yeah, I'm curious, have you seen anything you're like, this is actually really interesting and effective?
Yeah. I mean, the QR code, when I first got here, we were in the middle of revitalization, and we used to have these big banners that had QR codes like hanging from the ceiling. And I was like, those are so stupid. That needs to come down. And now I wish we had them back. It's like, so I feel like the QR code one's a pretty big one. I mean, I'll be interested to see what happens with TikTok. And, as we're recording the ban or whatever, I might have said something more that way of like short form content, especially with students. So I'll be super interested to see how YouTube shorts go. I mean, if you open YouTube on your phone right now, it immediately takes you to shorts. You don't even go to long form video content. And so I think there's something in that. Like I really do, especially as the attention span of a teenager in the next gen world shortens. I
think too, even there's really interesting automation that can happen.
Yeah.
In regard to like you said, hey, what do we have for people? What are some of the steps? I think of like, there's things with Instagram to where, hey, if somebody comments with certain keywords,
right,
I want a message sent with these links. And, there's stuff like that I think can be really interesting to think about in the process.
And then, so with that, I think that so for content, like on social media, short form content, however that lives on, in Insta or YouTube Shorts, which I think YouTube's going to win that game, by the way.
Nice. But
the other thing for me, you talk about those comment link or whatever, and we'll DM you. That's super thing. But the other thing that makes me think about is, and I don't know if this is like a cuss word on this podcast or not, but AI. Insta just came out with their AI.
Yeah.
And the more and more that AI gets into photo and video work, the more and more I think just the landscape, and don't hear me say like some traditionalist out there is going to be like, he's saying the church is going away. But like, I think church will change. Because we are so content driven. I'm real interested to see, how the Sunday sermon is impacted with a lot of that. How church staffs are impacted with a lot of that. Everything from graphics to videos to, where does the sermon live and for how long and how are we delivering content? So I'm interested to see how that goes, because I mean, AI is just it's going to level the playing field. And we'll see. And I mean, Snapchat has AI, it's like everything has an AI. Yeah. And so, I'm trying to keep a close eye on that and say, okay, as it comes to content creation and then creative work, like graphic work, video driven work, photo forward imagery, what does that have to do with students who are way, 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 way more visual, but are massive content consumers? What does that mean?
Yeah. Yeah, it's such an interesting world that is unfolding, and that I think we're still on the beginnings of. Now I'm curious about this. Like we kind of talked about some of the changes in youth ministry that you've seen, some things that have changed, things that are still the same, but I know it can be difficult for ministries in general to kind of shift and change when it comes to new generations. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned Gen Z, Gen Alpha. My question is, if you could just snap your fingers and change a few things about kind of how the church engages with these new generations, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, what would those things be?
I think it would be to give them more of a, man, I agree with this to some extent, but disagree with this to some extent. I think if I could snap my fingers and change the way we interact specifically with Gen Z and Alpha, it would be to get them more involved at a decision-making level sooner.
Okay.
Because I think that generation is, well, let me just say it this way. Every other organization in the world is telling that generation how they can make a difference right now.
Yeah.
And the church is the one that seems to be saying, you can make a difference in 6 weeks when you go through this class. And I get why we do that, because spiritual development is important and spiritual formation is a thing. But I just think, is it easy for them to come in and hold a door and serve and have a place or be asked their opinion, or, to be run through some sort of, test group of like, hey, how do you hear this messaging? Or what do you think we would do? And if we're going to talk about this, how many senior pastors are inviting that crowd into, hey, I'm going to do a sermon series on identity and anxieties or whatever. What do you wish we would hear about? Or even an anonymous poll. What do you think we preach too much on? What do you think we not preach enough on? Because they're going to, Gen Alpha is by what, fact check me if I'm wrong, but I think by 2025 something, right? They're going to be the biggest generation, right? Like there's a massive amount of Gen Alpha. Fact check me on that. I was just at a conference and somebody shot that quote out, but it was like that they're going to be the biggest generation the world has ever seen. And so, they got to start. Engagement is the new attendance. Yeah. And how can they engage? Right. And if you're saying, hey, the best way you can engage is to sit and watch and listen. Well, I'm going to do that right here. Yeah. And that's what we're missing. So a little bit to what you were saying before, I don't think we're in a dark, disappointing hour. I think the church is in the most critical hour to say, hey, we actually have something for you to do. Yeah. We actually have people for you to be with. We actually have something for you that's going to get your hands dirty, and it's going to, change the way that you look at the world and how you look at yourself and how you think about God. And we're not going to shy away from those hard questions. We're going to lean into them, but we can't just look at them and say, hey, the best thing we have for them is our next gen programming that really is just designed to kind of get them over there. So that way we can do the main thing in here. Yeah.
Well, I think that the thing I think about too with just is ministry in general is we are like, the church is a counterculture. The church is it should be a different place than what is normative in our culture. Mm-hmm. And ultimately a place where it's like, hey, this is how you actually thrive and actually can live a life that is far more fulfilling and satisfying than you thought possible. But I feel like at times we kind of mimic a lot of, oh, I see this, culture does this, like, so we'll kind of copy that. And I'm not against looking at, here's some things that are effective, technology, whatever. But I think there is a piece of that you're talking about, and correct me if I'm wrong, that I hear that's like, hey, we can actually go against the grain. And instead of be on the screen, look at the phone, like engage that way. And I'm not saying ignore that, but call people to something deeper because no one else is.
Yeah, I would say, let's take marriage, for example, which is a little bit different than what I was saying, but I'll bring it full circle. But we're in a marriage series right now in our church. And I was saying in presenting that one of the best things we could do for the younger generation in the marriage series, because it's always like, well, how are they going to see themselves in it or whatever, right? But one of the best things we could do is put really, really old people in front of them who've been married for a super long time, because they need to see, to your point, the counterculture, God's design actually works. Yeah. And so they need to see and like, oh, that worked for you. Like, and they need to hear testimony like, hey, it wasn't always perfect and we wouldn't always choose it, but we chose it over the long haul. And 50, 60, 70 years in, We have a couple that's actually been married for like 70 years. It's crazy.
That's awesome.
We chose it, and this is what God's design looks like, and it leads to life and flourishing. So take that idea and go back to the engagement piece. And so we're going to stick you in community, which is going to be different than the world's isolationist view, or just surround yourself with people who look like you, think like you, believe like you, and create the echo chamber, because that's what's best for you. But we're going to put you in community with widely different age, race, demographic, because you're going to see that God's design for community is better than the world's design for community. And we're going to put you in serve opportunities, because we're going to show you that the reality, what is true, we're going to put it in front of you. We're going to let you taste it, touch it, see it, feel it, that you actually feel more fulfilled when you serve other people than when you demand your own way. Yeah. And when you do that and you bring them to it and put them shoulder to shoulder with people who are older than them and actually living what they would call real life, then I think if the world is putting brokenness on display, here's a good way to say this. If the world is putting brokenness on display at record young ages for kids, then the church needs to match that by putting like counter-cultural life, not concept, life in front of them at record young ages. So that way they can look at the design of the world, taste and see it, and they can look at the design of God, taste and see it, and decide which one's better. And we're going to trust that life tastes better than death, right? And so that would be the thing. I would do that. And then I think, with that, part of that is design your church service around the next generation. And I know that they're not the giving generation, and I know that they're not the ones that, like, I'm not a senior pastor, so I don't feel that unique tension. But I just think you can't, man, this gets me fired up. You can't say that you want to reach the next generation, or you have a heart to reach the next generation, but your programming and your processes don't look anything like what they're interested in.
Yeah. Which that can be a good sort of tell of, well, how bad do you want to? Are you willing to let some of those things that might be sacred cows that might have always been change, shift, die out in order to do that?
Yeah.
Well, the whole kind of point of the podcast for us is conversations that help empower healthy churches. And so one of the questions we like to ask every guest on here is in your opinion, what is one essential component of a healthy church?
Well, I think an essential component of a healthy church, that might be the essential component of the healthy church, or a healthy church, is one that's focused on, and let me do this from both sides, like as a staff member and then as a church member, is one that's focused on building healthy individuals. And so like on staff, because I'm sure on this podcast, it's a lot of church staff, right?
Yeah.
Man, you're not going to have a healthy staff or a healthy church if you're focused on what you can get out of people instead of what you can put into people. If you're thinking about how to get the most juice out of the squeeze, I beg you to quit your job today, and go find a new one, because that's not ministry, and Paul does a good job in Ephesians describing what the role of, the shepherds are and the pastors are, and that's to equip the saints for the work of ministry. And that's not just about building organizations and getting things done. I'm just a big believer in, if you build the person, they will build something of substantial worth, and God will use them to do that. And so I think that looks like, from a staff point, truly loving and getting to know, and then developing your people's strengths and covering for their weaknesses. Right. And I get it's a job, it's a job, like we got to work, we got to perform or whatever. But the scripture would say that love bears all things, believes all things. Right. And so that idea is like, I'm going to cover up, and I'm not going to cover up your moral failure, and I'm not going to cover up, stuff that needs to be called out and exposed and all that stuff. Don't get me there. But a leadership and an idea where you build a church around, like, I'm actually going to serve you, just like Jesus did. Imagine, where I'm going to get to know Scott and his passions and what he's great at, and I'm going to make my win him winning,
Yeah.
And I'm going to make my bad days where I'm covering for his mistakes, so that way he can win in the future, in a bigger way than I can. And that self-sacrificial leadership that doesn't look at, resources or people as like, man, how can I gather people to build something that I'd love to put my stamp on, but instead thinks, how do I empower people and love them and lay my life down for them and build into them where they can take all the credit and I take all the blame, and, they get built up, and my ceiling gets to be their floor. Yeah. And so I think that on a staff thing, like, man, go work at that healthy culture, even if you're not getting paid as much, Right. Okay, let me say this. When I was young, I first started at a church, and I was young enough not to know that this is maybe not what you're supposed to say in a leadership team room. And I was in a leadership team room way too young, and was around executive staff and able to speak into things way too young. And I said, I'm just looking, we were talking about this staff development, whatever. I said, I'm just looking for, leaders who will let their ceiling be my floor. And the senior pastor of that church looked at me, scoffed, and with like this look on his face goes, that's the most selfish and lazy thing I've ever heard. And I was just destroyed because I had a father wound and am drawn to like, strong leadership and then being the guy and being told, I'm awesome. And what I was saying is like, hey, I'm just looking for somebody to develop me and is okay if my future outpaces their current realities, and I want opportunities and I want guidance or whatever. But man, in the church, don't we often operate how that guy was like, oh, that's so selfish and lazy and, whatever. Yeah. And I just think about Jesus telling the disciples, hey, greater things in me is what you're going to do. Yeah. Greater works than these, and he was setting those young boys up and women that were with him, to do great works and to let them out. And so I think leading like Jesus in that sense, which is not what you asked, but leading like Jesus is leading where you develop people and then send them out for greater things than even you do. And so that's what I think a healthy church looks like on a staff side. And I think that's what a healthy church looks like on the church side too, where, Empowering Leadership, great book, makes this point. We say all the time that discipleship and empowering people is about them reaching the world. But if you go through and you look at your volunteer job descriptions in the list, almost everything that you offer to develop leaders in your church is to make the Sunday thing happen. Yeah. It's like you're not like you're developing them on how to make the organization run, which is great. The church needs to run, right? We need AVL guys. We need people at the doors. Sure. We need parking lot people, all that. But I'm at 31 just thinking through, man, what does it look like to develop people in the church and be for them to such a degree that because they're members of United City Church, they're actually better members of the oil and gas company they work at or the school district that they work for, or they're better moms and dads, right? Like we're building something into them. And when they serve in our church, it's not so we can get something out of them. It's so that way we can get something into them, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Well, and I think too, the focus, right? You said so much of church leadership development is like, help us kind of get the Sunday thing done, the weekend experience, service, whatever. And some of it's just a perspective change to realize that's actually not the biggest thing for us. And some people say, oh, it's not the biggest thing, but then you look at staffing, time, resources, and it is versus no, the people in our church are. Yeah. And so we're going to actually design things around them. And, it's hard, certainly, especially to make those changes or transitions to get to that point. But I think in the end, it's what you're talking about. Like that's actually what matters most.
And I think because I can feel it on the other side of the screens, like already, it's like, yeah, yes. And I said this too, but like doors have to be held and all that stuff. But I think when you do that and it's like, hey, we're going to still ask for those things because we want to reach people, or we do need the lights on, and we do need AC, and we do need all that stuff. Okay, that's great. Maybe what we're calling you to is, you're doing all that. Okay, then do the deep work and go deeper and say, just ask yourself, here's a column. Here's everything we're asking out of our people. Here's a column. What do you do that's budgeted, that's staffed?
Yeah.
That's intentionally thought through, as much as this, that's actually designed for their formation and for their good. That's going to make them better, Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a great question I think church leaders can ask. And I think that provides some answers then, to take some action.
One of the things we did, if we got time, at our church currently, we started a serve conference. So we used to have the serve team launch, and it was all about how to do your job here. Well, we started a serve conference that had things like how to manage your time. Right. And how do you order your finances in a godly way? How to handle conflict, working hard, and just almost like a biblical ethic on being a laborer and a worker, because our thought was, hey, this will make them better serve team, but it'll also make them better in their workplace. And so we're just going to give you a biblical framework for what it looks like to do work, and to have conflict, and to lead other people, and to manage your time. And we even did one on casting vision, but that's a super church thing. So we just talked about priorities and setting goals. Like, what would the Bible say about goal setting, and is it ambitious or whatever? And we talked through all that. And I had a guy who works at a major insurance company come to me and was like, dude, we got to get you to come in, and not because I'm great, but it's like, man, the Bible speaks to that. And I was like, yeah, dude. And so, it's been cool because he got a promotion this year. And so now he's leading all these different teams. And he's like, dude, I'm using the stuff you were talking about in your breakout. And okay, that's it. The church made you better. You didn't make the church better. We made him better. And his company noticed, and God, ultimately it's God and the Holy Spirit, he's experiencing that. And so I just think, are they making you better? Okay. Are they making you better, or are they just making you busy as a staff member and just a member? Are they making you better, or are they making you busy?
Yeah, that is a great question, and one that takes some wrestling with, but that is fantastic. Yeah. And I think that's a good period, at least on the bulk of our or on this period on the sentence of our conversation. I don't know, that broke down.
It's Thursday, poorly, man. He's
people get what I'm trying to say there. I think that's awesome. We have something we call our final five. These are just rapid fire. Love to run through these. First one, what's one book that you would recommend to church leaders?
Okay. At Your Best by Carey Nieuwhof. And I know that's super common, but I love the learning your energy, like your time. Like, not all time's created equal. I don't want to give away the whole book because you should pay the man. He's worth it. But basically it gets you working time in your favor instead of against you, and teaches you how to know when in the day you're at your best, put your most important work when you're at your best, and then delegate everything else to other times. Because I just think, dude, as a coach and a pastor, if you can get control of you, and if you can get control of your week, man, that is the hack. That is the ultimate hack. So know yourself and get control of your time. So At Your Best by Carey Nieuwhof. It's a great book.
Nice. All right. What's the last thing you listened to? Spotify, Apple Music, kind of wherever you get your music from?
Big Spotify guy. The last thing I listened to was a podcast. Well, actually, that's not true. The real true thing, the last thing that I listened to was The Wiggles with my daughter this morning. And so
I love it.
That was on YouTube.
We only accept the true answers there. Wait, let me check. And then it's like,
but if
I hate to admit this,
but if you wanted a podcast plug, the last thing I listened to on Spotify right here is episode 45 of the Jabin Chavez leadership podcast called Big Leadership. And it was really good.
Awesome.
So love it.
Love it. What's your favorite piece of technology or software? And the only rule on this one, you can't see your phone.
Okay. The one that I'm loving the most right now, and this is so old, man, I can't believe I'm about to say this, but it's Spark. So if you're not familiar with Spark, it's an email software, but I have the premium version because I'm rich. No, I'm just kidding. It's not that expensive.
All those sponsorships.
Yeah. But I love that it has the AI that will read an email and then give you the summary. Now it also has the AI that will like respond. I don't really do that. I'm not going to lie. I've done it a few times, but I don't really do that. But like when, you know, somebody clacks off a long email, like I love to just like, tell me what was that email about? Because I'm an 8 on the Enneagram, a red in the insights, and I don't know, whatever in your favorite, whatever. But basically I'm be bright, be brief, be gone. So I'm just like, just tell me what it is and let me know how I can make a decision. So I love Spark.
Spark. Awesome. What is, quote, piece of advice that has stuck with you over the years?
Oh, dude, that's a great question. I think the one that's made the most impact on me, and if we're talking about, you know, 4 and 2 church leaders and healthy church leaders, when I was first getting into the game, so to call it, my worship pastor at the church I grew up at said, don't ever try to be anyone else other than you, because if a church doesn't want you, you don't want that church. And I've just found it to be ultimately true that you're going to have every opportunity to position yourself as someone you're not, and to put a fake front forward, or to present, you know, the best parts of you and hide the whatever. But when you're fully authentic, God blesses, you know, who you really are instead of who you pretend to be. And so like, as you navigate calling and like where you're going to work and what roles you're going to take or whatever, it's just best to be super upfront with leadership about, hey, here are all my strengths and here are all my weaknesses. And here's what I'm really passionate about. And here's what I could care less about. And that'll just go so much better for you. It's gone great for me, you know, so I think it'll go great for people if they just heed that advice. Just be the real you and don't try to be anyone else.
Yeah. That's good. What is one thing that you'd like to communicate to our audience of church leaders? And maybe you just did, actually.
Yeah, man, I think if I could communicate one thing in my pastor voice, hey, if you only remember one thing, and if you only write one thing down, it needs to be this. I think the biggest thing I would say is fight to know yourself. And maybe getting into hot water with spiritualism or whatever in 2024. But I think there is something deeply Jesus stuff about getting to know yourself. Because if God created me, and the psalmist says he knit me together in my mother's womb and intricately put the details of me together, then as I get to know myself, let me say this in a safe way so I don't have to go back and redact this later because I'm just a verbal processor. I think then as I get to know myself, I get to know a little bit about God. Like, God, why did you create me that way? Or I get to at least see how God made me. Now, granted, there's sin, flaws, and flesh and all that. But so I've just been in a season of doing deep dive work of, you know, what's my work profile? What's my emotional EQ? Why do I see the world the way I do? And you know, counseling, me and my wife are big on counseling. Our church pays for counseling. And so, you know, so just deep work of like, who am I? And God, why have you created me this way? And how can I best live my life? And to know that it's to live the life the way that God created me, and my strengths and my weaknesses and all that. So the biggest thing I think I could say is like, hey, do some work and get to know yourself. Like dig up.
I think that's great advice.
Dig up your drama and your baggage and your trauma, if you're comfortable with that word, and know who you are as a worker, your Enneagram, your whatever it is you feel comfortable with, and just get to know who you are. And then, you know, run with that and fight the sin and lean into the Savior, and then just put that on display and say, yeah, this is who God created me to be.
Yeah, no, I think that's really wise. And I think you minister better, you serve people better, but you also avoid hurting people too, for sure, with some of those things that sometimes we don't even know are below the surface. I'm going to add one question. We usually do 5. I want to do 6 because I'm curious about this. If you could only have one method of brewing coffee for the rest of your life. Never can use another one again. Just for drip, like just like a black cup of coffee. You know what I mean? I'm not talking espresso. Like what brewing method would you choose?
To be truly me and transparent and authentic, it would be the French press, not because it yields the best cup of coffee, but because I will, like a good preacher and pastor, close the way I opened. I am a coffee addict. So to be able to have a whole French press in one sitting and not have to just wait for one cup of coffee on a pour over, I would do French press.
Okay. I like it. I like that. Hey, man, we so appreciate your time and the wisdom, and just, it's been such a fun conversation, but I think really fruitful. Before we do go, can you just share with our audience where they can learn more about Simply Strategic, where they can connect with you, and kind of just outline next steps for people?
Yeah, 100%. The easiest way to find Simply Strategic Ministry is on Instagram or simplystrategicministry.com, and you can connect with us there, DM us, or you can fill out, we do give away a free coaching session to every single person. You get 1 free hour of coaching from us, because at the end of the day, we do want to add value more than we want to make money. And so, connect with us there and schedule a free coaching call, and we'll tackle whatever you want. And if you feel like it adds value, then you can get coaching. And then you can just connect with me personally if you want on Instagram, Patrick Weikle, and at United City Church. If you're in the Northeast Houston area, man, would love for you guys to come check us out and connect to our community of faith. And that's the easiest way to get connected to Simply Strategic, and then to me personally. So,
yeah, awesome. Well, we'll link to that for people, so it's nice and easy as well for people to do that.
Yeah, Landon would kill me. You can also find our podcast on anywhere you get podcasts. So Simply Strategic Ministry Podcast, and connect. We'd love to. Awesome. Love to add value to you.
Yeah, I love it. Well, again, we'll link to that. Certainly would recommend people following up, listening to podcasts, connect with Patrick, and really thankful just for your heart for ministry too. Because I think, man, that's what's come through ultimately, your heart for people, not only students, but just heart for the church. And so thank you for taking the time today. And thank you for those of you listening, watching this. We really appreciate your time. Again, our goal is conversations that empower healthy churches. So we hope that this has helped. If it has, we would encourage you to subscribe, to leave a review, maybe to share this episode by sending a link, so that we can get these conversations into more church leaders' ears, and hopefully continue to serve and help empower healthy churches. So thank you so much for being with us, and we'll see you next time.
This episode of the Church Leadership Lab podcast is brought to you by Ministry Brands, the largest provider of church technology software. Over 90,000 churches rely on Ministry Brands for their single platform solution that brings together all the digital tools a church needs. From online giving to websites to church management software and more, Ministry Brands is leading the way in simple-to-use, innovative solutions, all with the goal of empowering healthy churches. To learn more, visit ministrybrands.com.